Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is Mike Consul, your host. Two quick things before introducing you to my guest. First, I encourage you to subscribe to this podcast by clicking on the follow button and also clicking on the bell icon so you are alerted to each new edition of the program. Second, in addition to being the producer of this podcast and interviewing novelists, I am a novelist myself. I've written 4 books, 3 novels, and 1 short story collection. In the episode notes, you will find a short link to my Amazon page and all 4 of those titles. Now, on with our program. In the spotlight is Diane Winston. She is a Pulitzer Prize nominated journalist, author, and columnist. She teaches at the University of Southern California. She has authored and edited numerous books on the connection between religion, media, American history, and politics. She's written numerous books. I won't go through all the titles with you, but suffice it to say she's written a lot. And in the episode notes, you'll see a link to her website so you can learn more about her there. But you're going to learn plenty about her right now. I will say that her latest book is called Writing the American Dream, How the Media Mainstreamed Reagan's Evangelical Vision. That's from 2023. And it reveals how the Reagan presidency utilized news media to spread a new religious vision of American identity, one which continues to influence politics today, including the rise of Trumpism and Christian nationalism and so on. She is also a Knight Chair and has hosted and moderated numerous panel discussions on topics ranging from reporting on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to American right-wing religious identities to the Vatican's public diplomacy. Well, that's got to be a hot topic right now with the with the verbal battle going on between Trump and our new Pope. And it goes on from there, really a long history. And she's those Pulitzer nominations, journalistic Pulitzer nominations, are tied to places like the Raleigh News and Observer, the Dallas Times Herald, Baltimore Sun. She's also appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, and so on. She's decorated. She is absolutely decorated. But what grabbed my attention was that she wrote a piece, and I'll read the headline to you. It's From Bodice Rippers to Romantasy. Romance novels are dominating the book market and rewriting women's sexual power. We need to learn more about this. I always knew that romance novels sold very well, but the statistics from this article really underscore just how powerful this is. But with that, Diane Winston, welcome to Novelist Spotlight.
Oh, Mike, thanks so much for having me.
You know, this is such a great subject. I want you to tell us, first of all, how did you get onto the subject and talk about how eye-popping it was to see the statistics that you wrote about?
Well, as I say in the article, I was a closeted romance reader from the time I got married on, and that's been over 30 years. As you can see from my profile, I'm a scholar of American religion. However, I've been reading romance novels longer than I've been a scholar of American religion. When I first started reading them in the 90s, it wasn't exactly fashionable to admit that in the circles I was traveling in. As a Princeton University student, I wasn't about to tell my friends that, oh, gee, in my spare time, I'm reading bodice rippers. Bodice rippers are a way of referring to those paperback novels where you see a very hunky guy ripping open a woman's dress. However, I just love these sort of romantic 19th century visions of sex and love and adventure. And so I became a dedicated student of it.
So let me stop you right there for a second, because so you're a very serious person doing scholarly work, but this was your guilty pleasure,
Yeah.
your cotton candy. There's a lot of ways to refer to this. What was it about romance writing that lit you up to the point where you would be reading them surreptitiously?
Surreptitiously in front of my young stepdaughters. I think it was escapism. Instead of the daily grind that I faced, here was a world where women had beautiful clothing and they dressed up every day and they ate amazing 10-course meals. and they were also free to explore their passion. Now, obviously, there was a lot wrong with women's roles in the 19th century. That's obvious. Women didn't have much of a public role, and I'm sure many of them felt constrained by their private roles. But if you just focused on, a few little things and tried to forget the rest, you could see that I could see it was the exact opposite of my life. And it was kind of exciting because of that. Oh, oh, and all the men were really handsome, really sexy, and they really had strong personalities, which I also found attractive.
Sure, yeah, and then you're reading these again surreptitiously, but things changed over time. You're not shy about this anymore. What changed between then and now?
Well, a lot more people began reading romance, and the genre itself really opened up to include a lot more variety. And um, I just got older and more content with myself, so I didn't feel I had to sneak around anymore. But what happened to me is less important than what happened to the genre. And I think a few things happened between the early 90s and the current moment. One is that the book industry began realizing that romance really sells. Right now, romance accounts for 25% of all US book sales, and it reaps about 1.44 billion in global sales. That was in 2023. So obviously, this is a moneymaker. And once publishers realized that, I think they began devoting more time and effort to cultivating this little garden that only was going to grow and grow and grow. At the same time, um, a lot of a lot of progress was being made by women in the workforce, and women were starting to break glass ceilings. They were going into new professions, and they really began feeling more empowered. I'm not saying every woman everywhere, but I think there was a general sense among women that things were really opening up for them. And I think these two things, the discovery of a new market and the empowering of half the population, paved the way for more variety in the stories that came out. So when I was first reading romance in the early 90s, most of what you could get were bodice rippers, these 19th century stories of women swept away by passion. All of a sudden, we began seeing rom-coms. Maybe it was the influence of the movies. Maybe the old Meg Ryan, Tom Hanks movies of the 80s and 90s began showing folks there was an audience for rom-com. And I'm thinking of, When Harry Met Sally as the best example of that. But we began seeing more rom-coms, and then we began seeing um, a whole sideline of queer romance, lesbian romances, gay romances. And then we began seeing more romances set in various environments. So outer space, alien romances. And then we began seeing a whole proliferation of different genres, everything. And now I'm talking more contemporarily, but everything from women traveling back in time, women going to outer space, women encountering animals who were half people, women and women with disabilities, women who were not just white European women, but Black women, Asian women, Latino women. All these different categories of women began populating different romance stories. And, they weren't just in 19th century boudoirs and banquet halls. These were happening on farms. They were happening in small towns. They were happening in big cities. Oh, I forgot the whole supernatural. side of this, which will lead me into romantasy, which is a more recent genre which mixes fantasy with romance. And that really caught on with younger women. So one of the reasons that the genre has really taken off in recent years is that there's a niche for almost everybody. If you want a Christian romance, Jewish romance, Muslim romance, if you want, something set in the Caribbean, set in Russia, set in China, whatever you want, you can find. And
Mhm.
that sort of wealth of storytelling, I mean, it's fabulous.
I remember as a kid, I have three older sisters, and I remember that there was a paperback novel sitting around called Sweet Savage Love by
Yes,
Rosemary Rogers.
I read that.
You read that. Well, I picked that thing up and I thought, what is this? And I started reading. I mean, I was just a kid at the time, so I wasn't really very critical of so much, but it looked sexy, it looked sexual. But then I was, hormones had taken their place. And I started reading and I didn't stop reading. I finished the whole thing and there was, I mean, there was a lot of sex in it. There was a lot of descriptive language and not just sexual descriptive language. I still remember the line of her saying, Rosemary Rogers writing that his fingers rushed across my skin like burning branches or flaming branches. It was something like that. So, the purple prose, but very descriptive, beautiful, beautiful stuff. It's evolved since then. But, one of the things, as you were speaking, I thought about how you can take even a movie like Malcolm X, a very serious movie about a historical figure, and surprised. One critic said there's a surprising sub storyline about his relationship with his wife. There always seems to be a relationship love component that is being brought to almost any kind of movie, because unless there's a human connection, particularly, I think male female sexual connection of some kind, uh, there seems to be a little bit vacuous. There seems to be something missing. And that's how powerful it is that we want these kind of romance stories. And like you say, the rom coms, those are big sellers. They're not always the best made movies, but they're still very big sellers. But the domination, 25% of books sold in the United States, I'm reiterating what you had said here, and then the genre earned $1.44 billion globally in 2022 through 2023. One other thing I wanted to bring up, since you were surreptitiously reading your romance novels back in the day, I remember when 50 Shades of Grey came out, and a lot of women were reading that but hiding it. Well, they read it until the ebook reader came along. When the ebooks came along and nobody could tell what you were reading, there was an explosion of sales for 50 Shades of Grey because women weren't reticent to get their hands on it because they didn't have to worry about hiding it. It was a big book. So I don't know where that sits within kind of the history of romance, but it obviously was a huge seller, Diana.
Yeah. Two things you said, Mike, that are so right on. I just want to stress them. And that is the connection, the love. Most romances, no matter what genre, what the people are, where the people are, is fundamentally about human connection. I don't read a lot of romances where someone's having casual hookups and changing partners constantly. No matter how sexual or non-sexual it is about finding someone who sees you. And that's at the heart of the genre. And I think we all want to be seen, and being seen, not just being seen as a whole person. So being seen physically and sexually is also at the heart of these books. And one of the things I talk about in my article is that one big change I've seen in the genre is in the bodice rippers days, it was mostly male initiated sex about within the male gaze and about male penetration. Today, a lot of these stories are about female pleasure and female orgasm and about women being seen sexually. not just what their sexual need, not just fulfilling their particular sexual needs, but understanding that women have different needs than men. And that kind of connection, I think, is what's so wonderful about the genre right now, because so often women aren't seen um, as themselves. They're seen through a male gaze, and we're objectified, we're sexualized, we're used to sell all kinds of products. Our bodies become men's fantasy land. But in many of these books today, our bodies are seen. And whether we're fat or thin or 60 years old or 30 years old, the men in the books are celebrating our bodies and giving us pleasure in ways that earlier books didn't. And that's about human connection. Well, the other thing I was going to say is that I could not agree with you more. I think the rise of ebooks and also Audible has made people who might have felt, a little cringy about showing a book cover on the subway. Now they have utter privacy to listen to whatever they want. And so, I could be walking along the beach in Santa Monica listening to the sexiest novel in the world, that I wouldn't want anyone to know I'm reading. And because I can have my headphones on, it's just me in the book, right?
Yes, absolutely. And you even see this in the movies, Diane. It used to be that when there was going to be a sex scene, and especially the first time around, they've met, they can't keep their hands off each other. The woman drops to her knees and starts providing the man with oral sex. Nowadays, and I said this to my wife a few different times, I said every time a sex scene comes up now is the guy's giving the woman oral sex. That's where it
Yeah.
starts off. And it
Yeah.
used to just be, well, that's what a woman does, but the man, that's not what the man does. That's changed on screen. And I also wanted to bring up Anne Rice, who I don't know that you would consider her a romance writer, but she had an awful lot of sexual energy in her books, a lot of very good writer. I mean, descriptive writer. My wife read almost her entire catalog, and her stuff was very sensual. And even if it's not considered romance, she definitely leveraged sexuality, romance, sensualism in her books, her vampire books.
Yes, Mike, that's a great point. And that's sort of maybe that's the beginnings of this romantic genre that's so popular today. Today it's not unusual to read a romantasy where you have vampires, werewolves, dragons, gorgons, I mean, a whole gamut of fantastical creatures. But Anne Rice was one of the first writers to really break through to the mainstream, who combined this kind of supernaturalism with the everyday world. And yeah, that's
Oh
a
yeah,
really good insight.
a vampire who wants a woman's blood, and there's just an irrepressible desire for the
Right,
woman in her carotid artery and so
right,
on. So
right.
I mean, those scenes are very sexy in movies too, and certainly in novels. So let's talk a little bit more about women's sexual power. How do you see? Well, I will say this. Let me preface what I'm about to ask you by telling you that I've had several romance writers on the program, one of whom was from Britain or Scotland. I forget exactly where she was from, but she said, I've written some romance books. There's not so much as a kiss exchanged. So it's romance, but at the same time, she said, some of the best romance has nothing to do with any kind of sexual content. It's all intimacy, but intimacy on every level except the physical. That would kind of, disappoint me because I do like the sexual content, but it just goes to show that there's a lot of different romance can be seen through a prism that fractures its application in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and again, I think that's why it's so popular because it is protein. There's all kinds of ways you can do it. Do you remember the movie Her with I think it was Joaquin Phoenix. It was
Yes,
a while back.
yes.
I mean, there was a case of a man falling in love with his, was she AI or his,
She like a personal digital assistant on
yeah,
his phone.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, they had a lot of intimacy, but it was never sexual. So yes, you can make a connection without even touching someone, and that's gratifying too, right?
I would also point out that that movie, as soon as I walked out, I remember turning to my wife and saying, "That movie," I said, "that is going to happen because we're practically there now." When that movie came out, you just saw where technology was going, and I'm actually surprised that you're not seeing it right now. But clearly, technology is capable of doing exactly what was shown in that movie. Now,
Oh,
obviously,
yeah.
we don't want people falling in love with phony digital Scarlett Johanssons, but at the same time, it can provide company to people who are lonely at the time, or when we get elderly and we're doing a lot of time sitting around. There's ways for that to be applied that isn't necessarily, hey, this is not right. You really should be with people. It's a supplement. As a supplement, I guess is what I'm saying. But again, it shows the need for contact and
Right.
the need for intimacy on a mental or emotional level that doesn't, as you say, necessarily require clothes off and bodies sweating on one another. I wanted to point something else out. The sociological research on this, Diane, is such that they say there's a lot of people are lonely. A lot of people aren't in relationships. A lot of women and men divorce, but having trouble finding anybody else. Some of them have given up on that. And also that as much as our society is sexualized, when they do the research, they say there's not a lot of sex happening out there. There's a lot of people not having much sex, married people, dating people, you name it. And I suspect in a lot of cases, it's not because they want it that way, but where they get their sustenance, their sexual sustenance, if you will, they turn to romance novels in that case because I'm not getting that. I have plenty going on, maybe in my relationship, my marriage, or my significant other of some kind, but that's not where we really click. So on the pages of romance novels, that's where I live that. Do you think there's anything to that?
Yeah, I think that's a really important insight that not only are there a lot of people out there not having sex, there's probably a lot of people out there feeling like their sex they are having is not as fun as they would like it to be. Um, and so some of these books provide the vicarious pleasure
Precisely.
they've
Yeah.
wanted. But I've also seen articles about how sometimes these books um, offer readers um, ideas to spice up their bedroom lives. So they could
Yes.
they could also, work as how-to manuals for some people.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. I could see a woman handing off a romance novel to a man and, why don't you read this and then think about what we do on date nights, sort of thing. I
Yeah,
love
yeah.
I love this line from your article. It says the Bible may be the best-selling book of all time, but annual sales of romance novels even outpace the scriptures. A great line and a true line. I mean, the number of people reading romances, I'm sure, far exceeds the daily Bible readers, as numerous as they are too.
I will step in and say if anyone has read the Hebrew Bible, there is lots of sex in there also. There's, rape, there's prostitution, there's seduction. So um, oftentimes these are not the, verses, chapters and verses that we learn in Sunday school or at services, but I really like the fact that the Hebrew Bible is very much aware of this side of human nature. And, it's all there.
Yes. Yeah, interesting point. What about the percentage of men who read romance novels. I suspect is pretty low, but what do you have any statistics on that? I mean, it's clearly a woman's genre, but um, I just wonder how open men are to reading it.
That's a great question, and I should have Googled it when I wrote my article, but I don't know. Um, there's been a real proliferation of gay men's novels recently,
Hmm.
and I don't know if men read those, but for sure women read them. And we really learned that when Heated Rivalry came out this winter, and it kind of was a surprise breakout hit. Heated Rivalry, in case anyone doesn't know, is a story of two gay hockey players, Canadian and Russian, who fall in love. And the series shows the arc of their relationship. And what surprised so many people was that many straight women were watching this show. In fact, straight women and gay women too were at the heart of its popularity. So um, I think there is a market for gay male romances, um, which probably appeal to gay men they appeal to straight women and gay women. But I don't know if heterosexual men read romance. You
Well, I
say,
certainly do. I certainly do. I don't read gay romance, but I do read heterosexual. I mean, because it applies. It's applies to me. It's I don't have any reference point with gay romance, but I do know that I've met women over the years who have said that they look at gay porn sites, gay
yeah,
male porn sites. They're not. Um, I mean, they're heterosexual women, but for whatever reason, that really turns them on. So I could see uh, your point being correct that there's gay male novels, romance novels that women are reading as much as men do. So,
yeah. And when I began looking into that, a lot of women felt that the relationship between the two men in heated rivalry was emotionally realistic and emotionally complex, and avoided a lot of the toxic masculinity that sometimes makes heterosexual relationships problematic. So, um, yeah.
I want to let our listeners know that the article, which I've been pilfering from to ask Diane these questions, the link is in the episode notes so you can read it for yourself. And, one of the points that she makes in there, though, she says, though they're not canonized as literary um, uh, classics, or actually, I said that wrong. Though they are canonized as literary classics, 19th century novels such as Pride and Prejudice, Jane Eyre, and Wuthering Heights can also be read as romances, stories written by women and centered on women's emotional lives, courtship, and desires. What a powerful Wuthering Heights is out. Going back to my childhood, my oldest sister, I used to remember when it would come on TV, and it came on pretty regularly, the original version of Wuthering Heights, the movie. She would be sobbing at the end of the movie every time, even though she knew it was coming. So that here we have this remake now, and I watched it. My wife and I and a friend watched it, and the relationship between Heathcliff and not just what was his wife's name in the movie? It's Margot Robbie, but she plays the woman
Catherine.
Catherine. But then Catherine has a sister who he used as leverage to try to get to her, and there was a lot of powerful and dominance and submission type of energy between that whole thing. It was really quite sick. There was a lot of dysfunction going on there, but that's all part of. I mean, that's all part of human sexuality. There is a lot of what you would call dysfunction. Um, so when we talk about romance these days, Diane, there are the Harlequin romances, which are short, quick reads. They're really just formulaic and repetitive. That's not what we're talking about here necessarily. If people enjoy them, then all more power to you. But there are romance novels that are written at a high level. Well, in the ones that you talk about, Jane Eyre, Pride and Prejudice, Wuthering Heights, not necessarily considered romances, but they can certainly be seen that way based on what you described there.
Yeah, I think there is a tendency to, um, I think there's a tendency to marginalize whatever women are into. So the helping professions that are predominantly female, like teaching and nursing, are seen as secondary to being a businessman or being a doctor. And I think we owe a lot to sexism and misogyny for the ways we categorize things. And similarly, women's fiction, whether it's called chick lit or rom-com or romance, is seen as not quite as good as male novels and, you know, stories by and about men by men, for by and about men. And that's something I think we all should be wary of and fight against, because these kinds of novels are deemed classic now, but um, when Jane Austen and the Brontes were writing, oftentimes they used male synonyms, I mean male pen names, because if people knew women had written these books, they would have either been looked down upon or never even published. So some of what we call romance and might think is, not very good literature may in another 100 or 200 years be seen as, sparkling gems of a particular time and place.
Hmm. You
So,
know,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that saw or listened to one writer being interviewed. This is a podcast, not mine, but and he talked about how he used a pseudonym to write romance novels as a woman because he didn't want to confuse it with the stuff that he was doing, which he considered serious. Now, the romance he was writing was the quick stuff, like turn and burn. But he said it makes me money, and it feeds my habit until I can hopefully hit with the books that I'm writing that I really want to be known for and that are written under my name. So it's not just that there's a lot of people interested in romance. Romance readers tend to read a lot of books. They'll read one a week or a couple a week or several a month. Correct? I mean that's my understanding is that they're inveterate readers.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm so glad you brought up that point about male writers, because my husband's father, my father-in-law, worked in publishing in the 50s and 60s, and he said a lot of the romance writers were men, which may help explain why the books are so much from a male point of view, as far
Hmm.
as sexuality. But you're right. And maybe that also played into the shift we've seen, where as more women are writing these novels, they become more complex, more varied, and more interesting, as far as the sexual dynamics. Um,
You know, you make a point in the article. The genre took off in 2015 with Sarah Moss's novel, A Court of Thorns and Roses, a saga of a beautiful but impoverished teen who finds herself um, in and what kind of court is it?
very.
And what is that?
Um, it was a court with a lot of, a lot of fairies, like, people who have wings and can fly around.
Oh, I see. That okay. And
That's
this
yeah, it's
and then
the
it says 11 years and two series later, Moss's books have sold more than 75 million copies. So this was an inflection point right there for romance novels.
yes,
Not the only one, but one of them.
yes, that was the beginning of the romantasy era, which we are still in today.
Oh, I
And
see. Romantasy. Okay, so that's okay.
yeah,
That's gotcha.
yeah. And that's why I said Anne Rice sort of precedes that, and her vampire and witch books have some of that. But Sarah Maas dived into it headlong with uh, that series, A Throne of, what's the title again?
It's called a crown of
Thorn and Roses.
thorns and
Roses.
roses.
Yeah.
A court of thorns and roses.
And
Yes,
those
Sarah Moss.
those books were originally YA, young adult fiction, and that first series is more romance than sexual. But as Moss realized that older women were reading those books, she began to put more sex in them. So the later books in the series are sexier than the early books, and her subsequent series are sexual, even more sexual. But it's interesting because those early ones were more about connections that were emotional rather than sexual. However, this idea of um, blending the supernatural world of fairies and werewolves and people with supernatural power into a romance novel just has appealed to a lot of readers. And that genre probably is among the most popular right now in the romance category.
Hmm.
There's a lot of self-published books that have crossed over to become bestsellers. And it's just amazing to me that there's this deep hunger for stories that take us out of our everyday lives into totally different planes of existence, which may say something about people feeling very frustrated about how things actually are in the world today. It's nice to escape to a fairy court or, you know, a heaven or hell where people feel they have some agency.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Escapism is huge, and yeah, books and movies and so on. Um, you know, I'm trying to remember what the other point I wanted to make. One of the things I've said on the program a lot, though, Diane, is that if you watch the streaming channels, Netflix and Prime and Max and so on, I can't think of a time where you've had more opportunity as a novelist to get your work bought and brought to the screen. So often, all of these shows seem to be based on the novel, and a lot of times they're romance novels, and a lot of time somewhat dreadful in that it has to do with obsession and maybe even murder, these sorts of things. But I know what I was leading to is that if you're a novelist or you want to be a novelist, where you really see people make money is with genres. The
Yeah.
general writer of fiction, who I write this book now, but it's going to be a different topic later. It works for some people out there like Amor Tolls um, and there's others who don't come to mind right now. But genre fiction seems to sell very well because people they like detective novels or they like legal thrillers or they like sci-fi or romance. But the point that I'm really getting at is that although genre fiction is powerful, romance is the category that's blown them all out of the water, according to your stats, really. These other genres don't really hold a candle to the sales of romance books.
Mike, I think that's totally true. And what's most interesting to me is why I think detective novels and maybe even sci-fi are considered a step up from romance novels. I feel sometimes romance novels just don't get any respect, and that's because they're seen to be written by, for, and about women. I mean, you yourself said you were amazed to read the statistics, and I I think that just goes to what I'm saying about, the unfortunate existence of sexism in our world, that
Hmm.
it's hard for people to believe that this genre is so popular. And I I mean the follow-up question to that is why? Why is this the most popular category? And I think because women like to see themselves and they like to see their world and they like to see their fantasies written about. And oftentimes they don't feel represented by other kinds of literature.
Well, and it's not a bad thing for women to feel that, read about a man basically going wild for the woman. There is this common fantasy among women of being raped, and the point that psychologists will tell you is it isn't that a woman wants to be raped, is that what appeals to her in her fantasy is that a man who's so desirous of her, he loses control. And that certainly can be portrayed in romance novels, well short of rape. Just the idea that the guy is obsessed, can't live without her, is driven to the ends of the earth to get her back, or whatever the storyline might be.
Yes, and I think it's important, as you just did, to distinguish obsession or desire from rape, because obviously nobody wants to be raped, but people want to feel like their partner has an overwhelming desire for them. And maybe that's part of the popularity of these newer romances that show men obsessed with making women orgasm, because men are still in control sexually, but it's not about their pleasure, it's about the woman's pleasure, which is part of the difference from, old school and new school.
Yeah, I think that today, and I certainly am not speaking for all men, but I think that a lot of men today feel like the sexual act is incomplete if they haven't pleased the woman, if they haven't made sure to
Yeah.
make sure that they're doing what she wants and that she climaxes, and it's not just about him, and leaving this void in the relationship where and you saw this in we just saw this in Bridgerton. Bridgerton had the married couple, and she was not climaxing. And eventually, as she started asking her sisters and friends, "What is it like?" And you haven't had that happen. It's kind of like what. And then she went to work on basically her husband and started inquiring in gentle ways, not to offend him, but he knew she was faking it at one point and just said, "You don't need to do that. Just stop."
Gee,
Um,
was this the most recent series?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Obviously, I didn't see it. I have to go back and watch it as part of my research.
Yeah, there you go. And you see obsession in Wuthering Heights. Heathcliff. Well, they're both obsessed with one another.
Yeah.
And I just, in fact, after seeing the movie just last week, I downloaded Wuthering Heights off of Audible, and I'm looking forward to listening to that novel after all these years. Watching my sister sobbing when I was just a teenager, and now finally I'm going to find out what it's all about with Heathcliff and Catherine. I mean, obviously I get the idea from the movie. But looking forward to finally reading the novel now. Her only novel, Emily Bronte's only novel. Her
Yeah.
sister Charlotte wrote, I don't know, about a dozen, but this was her only one. But boy, she scored with it for sure. Do you have an all-time favorite romance novel or all-time favorite romance author?
I read so much of the genre, and and I probably am a book a week girl. That No, I don't have any favorites that just stand out for me. It's more of the subgenre. There are times that I just like rom-coms and I just want to read something light. There are times I prefer romantasies that are totally other than the world I live in. There are times I like reverse harems, which is one woman and several men. There are times I like aliens, people kind of
Mm.
with aliens. So it really, you know,
There's no
I
limits, really.
there's no limits. Someone told me they liked mafia um, themed romance, and I tried one of those. I wasn't very keen on those, though.
Sidney
So
Sheldon wrote a lot of that kind of stuff. He wasn't a romance writer, really, but he always had romance within his books. But like, for instance, Rage of Angels, that
yeah.
relationship, and also The Other Side of Midnight, just to name a couple that I've read. But they're light, fast reads. He wasn't known for his literary chops, but he definitely was good with wordplay in certain situations. And the stuff he wrote tended to be turned into movies. Now, and I could say the same thing about 'Fifty Shades of Grey when I was reading it. And honestly, I never finished it. Um, I didn't think I thought the writing was fairly deplorable, but because I remember saying to my wife, it just shows the power of a really good concept. The concept really, I felt like, sold that book. And for whatever reason, the whole dominance and submission sort of element to it, which was huge. Women, it appealed to women. But what I was told, and check me on this, is it was really the real value of the book to a woman reader was that she had cured him of that and got him to break down to the point where he got in touch with his own emotions and was able to be intimate with a woman without having to resort to medieval torture devices.
Oh, I guess I didn't get that far in the books to see that happy ending. I think,
maybe, maybe I like the medieval devices, but I got to tell you, it just her writing was not good enough for me to carry through. And I say that, I don't normally say something like that, except that, um, who am I to E.L. James has sold a huge number of books and had them made into movies. So who am I to criticize? So she obviously has struck a vein.
but see, I think, Mike, this goes back to what you were saying earlier about rape. I don't think women want to be raped. I think sometimes we want to be dominated. And that's a big difference. And I think that was the appeal of 50 Shades, that there was the domination that you can fantasize about, but it was consensual. And that's may have been what turned people on. And
Hmm.
I think once the book became mainstream and it was sort of okay to read it, and people who would never pick up a romance book or a rapey book read that book because it did speak to certain female fantasies, and it was also legit to be reading it.
Yeah,
And
you bring up a good point about dominance, and it wasn't strictly that okay, he's got these devices that restrain the woman and so on. He was financially dominant because he was
yeah,
basically a billionaire. His lifestyle, and he was dominant in a lot of different ways, and short of bondage, sexual bondage, and so on. But in the end, things did change. His character changed into something that was more on the level of having true intimacy and romance with the woman, the antagonist, I guess, or two protagonists. So at any rate, um, where do you think? I mean, I don't know whether you have any. I mean, romance is already spread out into so many different areas, as you were saying. I'm not sure if you have any thoughts to where romance is headed next. That it hasn't been. It sounds like it's been everywhere, really.
yeah, because when you were speaking earlier, I was thinking, there's a genre of billionaire romance where, someone's money makes them dominant, and a whole, the relationship flows from there. And there's also, BDSM novels where it's all up, it's all exposed. So I, I was kind of surprised to find these novels where half man, half bull were characters. Um, that was new to me. And novels, where women were literally entangled with multi-limbed aliens. Um, if I knew where the genre was going to go, I think I might try to write something and like get rich quick. But
Have you ever
it,
considered writing romances?
when I was very young, I thought I would do it, and I tried, but I was just terrible. Um, that was when I was in my 20s. So I'm not much of a fiction writer. Let's just leave it there.
Yeah, yeah. About, obviously journalism is, you star at journalism because of those Pulitzer nominations. So, all
Yeah.
good. Well, Diane, I really appreciate you taking the time to the readers. Again, the links in the episode notes include a link to Diane Winston's website as well as to the article that brought her to my attention and got me to where I wanted to have this conversation. And a really interesting one it has been, Diane. So thank you very much for coming on the program and sharing your research and insights with us.
Oh, Mike, it's been a pleasure. How many times in the middle of the day do I get to talk about sex and romance? Not enough.
Well, you've done it. So I hope that our listeners are going to rush out and buy some of the good romance that's out there. Thanks again, Diane.
Thanks, Mike. Bye.